Think what happens when you put all your weight on the wrong thing in life. Today's teaching comes from Luke 16, verses 19 to 31. And in this text, Jesus is going to show us exactly what happens when we do that. He's going to show us the disastrous eternal consequences of putting all of our weight on the wrong thing in life. In the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Jesus is going to show us that there is a heaven, there is a hell, and everyone either goes to one place or the other, but they never go to both, and they're never stuck somewhere in between. It is a definitive destination for each of our lives, one of those two places. But that's not all Jesus is going to teach us here. He's also going to teach us that the time for choosing where we will go for eternity is today. And the way we choose is either by believing and following Jesus or ignoring him and going our own way. In his book, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis wrote about this choice as he told a story about a busload of people who were able to take a trip from hell to heaven. Lewis's point in the story isn't to lay out a theology of heaven and hell so much as it is to show the choices we're making right now today are determining our eternal destiny. And they'll actually be the choices we continue to make in eternity. For example, in his story, Lewis describes people who were considered big men, important people, people who demanded their rights, people who had massive influence, people who lived only for themselves. But when they step off the bus into eternity, a shocking thing happens. They're so weightless, so ghost-like, so insubstantial and empty that a single blade of heavenly grass pierces them like a sword. Meanwhile, the people they would have ignored on earth, the seemingly inconsequential, insignificant people walking the face of the earth, in glory, are solid people, and they glow with an eternal weight of glory. For people who choose the world instead of God, earth itself will end up being just a suburb of hell, the first step toward going there. While for those who follow after God, earth will prove to have been from the beginning part of heaven itself. You see, eternity begins, if you think about it, right now in this moment you're living in. This is the start. And the choices you make today are determining where your eternal future will be. Which choice are you making? And where will the choice you're making land you for all of eternity? In Luke 16:14, just before our text today, Luke tells us the Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. Now let's remind ourselves the Pharisees were the ultra-religious, ultra-conservative people of their day. They were religious, but they loved money. And they sneered at Jesus when he talked about it. They sneered because Jesus told them that you cannot be both a lover of money and a lover of God. The world is still sneering at Jesus' words today. On the surface, they don't seem to make sense to our culture. If God's sovereign, and he is, and a person becomes wealthy, then doesn't that mean that God is blessing them because they're good people? God wouldn't reward the wicked, would he? This is a form of the prosperity gospel that many who call themselves Christians actually cling to and believe. It's a lie that smells like smoke and it comes straight from the pit of hell. I'm going to be blessed because I'm being good. But to see how untrue that is, all we need to do is look at Jesus, right? Jesus, who was he? He was the best person who ever lived. But as he said in Matthew 8:20, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He was essentially homeless as an adult, wandering from place to place. Best man who ever lived. Wealth is no more a sign of God's seal of approval on a person's life then it is a sign that the person who has wealth is evil. And that's the other extreme we go to, right? The evil rich. Wealth is just a thing. That's what the Bible teaches us. It is a thing to be stewarded and used. And we either steward it and use it for ourselves, or we steward it and use it for God and His glory. What makes wealth good or evil is simply what we choose to do with it. Rather than spending our lives building a comfortable but weightless existence that fades in eternity, what if we could step into that great reversal and see the opportunity to freely empty ourselves for others, because Jesus has already secured our eternal weight of glory? If you have it all, and you're here today and you're wondering, is this all it is? If you're worn out from chasing the American dream, or if you're despondent because that dream seems to keep slipping through your fingers, lean in, listen closely. Let Jesus turn your worldview upside down. Hear this parable from Jesus from Luke chapter 16, beginning at verse 19. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Now think of what Jesus is showing us in this parable. God's kingdom, what does it guarantee? It guarantees a great reversal, where heavenly rewards come to those who are humble in heart, and where earthly self-reliance leads to eternal emptiness. This parable stands as one of the most vivid, sobering, and challenging passages in the gospel. It's a wake-up call to those who are well off in this life, which, by the way, is most of us. So we need to take these words to heart. We need to think about them. It's a sweet comfort to those who aren't so well off, but it's a word of warning to those of us who are. Jesus presents a stark contrast between 2 men whose earthly realities are diametrically opposed, only to reveal an eternal state where their fortunes experience a great reversal. The rich man, dressed in royal luxury and feasting daily, is oblivious to Lazarus. Lazarus is a diseased beggar languishing at the rich man's gate. In eternity, the beggar is carried to Abraham's side, a place of ultimate honor and comfort, while the rich man finds himself in conscious, unquenchable torment in Hades. The imagery Jesus uses to describe the earthly state of the unnamed rich man and Lazarus is extreme, because Jesus really wants to show us the contrast. The rich man spends his earthly existence dressed in purple cloth, clothes of royalty, incredibly expensive because they came, that purple dye, drop by drop from rare sea snails. Jesus even fills in the details of the man's underwear. Fine linen was underwear. Fine linen was the ultimate luxury undergarment. It was linen that came from Egypt, and it was the softest material of its day. Look what else the rich man is doing. He's feasting sumptuously every day. This indicates a life of unimaginable excess. Think back to the parable of the lost sons. Remember the father threw a feast for the younger brother when he came home? Well, the word used here by Jesus to describe how the rich man's eating every single day is the same word that Jesus used to describe the feast the father threw for the lost son. It's extravagant every day. Conversely, there's Lazarus. He has to be placed at the gate, at the entrance to this rich man's estate. He's probably lame. He didn't walk there. Somebody placed him there. In addition to everything else, it seems that he doesn't have any food. He's just hoping to get crumbs that fall from the rich man's table. He's covered in sores and subjected to the ultimate indignity of the Jewish culture, unclean street dogs licking his wounds. Jesus tells us both men die. Both men die. Lazarus probably died with no fanfare at all. He's buried in a pauper's grave. No one comes to his funeral. He might have even had his body just disposed of in the valley of Hinnom, where the rest of the refuse went to be burned and disposed of. The rich man's also buried, but probably with a very ornate funeral, a great send-off. But the burial of both men marks a turning point, a great reversal. In verse 22, Lazarus, whose name literally means God is my helper, is carried by angels to Abraham's side, to Abraham's bosom. In ancient Near Eastern culture, guests reclined at couches at a dinner. And to be at the bosom of the host meant you were in the highest seat of honor, enjoying intimate fellowship and protection from the host. The one who was thrown outside the earthly gate with dogs is now seated in the position of highest honor at the heavenly banquet. But the rich man, whose life in reality is so insignificant that he doesn't even have a name in this parable, finds himself in Hades in extreme torment, begging for relief. Again, in his book, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis has people in hell that take that bus ride to heaven. And we know that can't happen. We're told here there's a great chasm fixed. But again, Lewis isn't trying to give a theology of heaven and hell. He's trying to show us how we end up in one place or the other. And he uses that story to illustrate. Lewis is using that hypothetical trip to explain to people that when you find yourself in hell, you're there because of your choices. And because of the hardness of your heart, you wouldn't undo that choice even if you had a chance. What Lewis is telling these people is, you are locked in hell, but the gate's locked from the inside by your choice. You didn't want God in this life. You won't want him in the next life, and you'll do everything you can to bar him. In this parable, Jesus is doing something different, but similar to what Lewis did in telling his story. Jesus is trying to use physical things to explain spiritual realities. Historically and theologically, we understand that upon death, the bodies of all people, well, they return to the dust, and they rest in the grave to await a final resurrection. But the Bible teaches their souls immediately go into the presence of Jesus. Here in this parable, that presence is pictured as Abraham's bosom. But the souls of those who have rejected God for their whole life go immediately into a state of conscious separation, anguish, and judgment, what Jesus calls Hades in this parable. It's not a final judgment. That awaits the day of resurrection. This is, if you will, an intermediate judgment that there's no turning back from. The fate is sealed at this point. There's a chasm. That's why Jesus says it's been fixed. No one can go from one to the other. So think about this. If the rich man is currently in this disembodied intermediate state where it's not physical, it's merely spiritual, how does he have a tongue? How does he experience thirst? Well, I think the best way to understand this is that Jesus is using language to accommodate spiritual realities. Because we're physical beings, we lack a vocabulary to fully comprehend purely spiritual realities. To communicate the intense, conscious, agonizing spiritual reality of being entirely cut off from God, who is the source of living water, Jesus uses the most severe physical sensations that we know: burning thirst, desperation for a single drop of water. The soul of this rich man is experiencing profound, real anguish, and Jesus is giving us physical categories to help us understand the weight of it. The rich man lived his whole life spiritually thirsty, but he didn't realize it because he was numbing his pain with physical feasts and creature comforts like fine underwear. In eternity, the physical numbness is all stripped away, and the true spiritual emptiness is fully exposed, emptiness that he freely chose. Meanwhile, Lazarus spent his entire life hungry physically, but spiritually satisfied. Because rather than relying on self, he instead put his trust in God as his helper. He looked past his physical realities to see spiritual truth. Lazarus knew that even if the rich man refused to help him, that God in heaven was his helper, just as Lazarus' name implied. Lazarus knew the words of Psalm 121, verses 1 and 2. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. This is the foundation of the great reversal that Jesus wants us to see. Those who look to self to satisfy themselves end up nameless, weightless, in anguish of soul, while those who trust God as their helper and look to Him and Him alone for help have a weight of glory, a name that's written in heaven, and enjoy eternal pleasures at God's right hand forevermore. To help us think through the implications of what Jesus is teaching us here, because they're important, I want to use two popular expressions that come from the world of sports. At least that's where I heard them. The first one is, it ain't how you start, it's how you finish. You can see the truth in this parable. The rich man seemed to start well. He's like a baseball team that wins, say, the first 62 games of a 162-game season, but then they lose the rest of the games and end up dead last. Winning the first 62 games is better than losing them, but in the end, it doesn't matter at all because last place is last place. It's weightless. It's empty. On the other hand, Lazarus seems to be hopelessly out of contention, but he ends up champion in first place. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. Success in this life means nothing if it results in failure for eternity. That's what Jesus wants us to see here. You never see a hearse that's pulling a U-Haul trailer, do you? To put it in biblical terms, Mark 8:36, Jesus said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? The world isn't going with you. The fine linen, the purple robes are not going with you into eternity. We often put so much emphasis on the here and now and spend so little time thinking about eternity. And this is what Jesus is trying to help us see differently. It would do us all well to remember that this present moment is simply a speck of dust on the timeline, the eternal timeline. Heaven and hell are forever. And that brings me to the second expression. The first, remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Second one is, it ain't what you got, it's what you do with what you got that matters. Lazarus had nothing, but he relied completely on God. The rich man had everything and he wasted it all. Galatians 5:6, Paul says, the only thing that counts in faith expressing itself through love. How is our faith expressing itself as we live day in and day out? Are we walking around things that need our attention, our time, our talent, our treasure? Because that thing, whatever it is going to interfere with our personal comfort in the minute, cause us maybe to get our nice clothes dirty? Or are we trusting God as our helper? Trusting Him that if we pour our lives out, He will be there and sustain us and fill us. So we willingly pour out our time and talent and treasure so we can say along with Paul in 2 Timothy 4, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time for my departure is at hand. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. Let me ask you a question. In your troubles, are you more like Asaph? Do you remember Asaph, Psalm 73? He envied the arrogant when he saw the prosperity of the wicked. He thought they have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. They have it so good. I wish I was one of them. That's what Asaph was thinking. Are you thinking that way too? Or do you think more like Paul, who said in 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. If you think back to Psalm 73, do you remember what the cure for Asaph's envy was? He gets to it finally in verses 16 and 17 after he pours out the anguish of his soul. He says, when I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. And then I understood their final destiny. What's he saying? He's saying in God's sanctuary, I saw things the way they really were. I saw where the rich, the arrogant were headed. In God's sanctuary, the spiritual realities became Asaph's new realities. But Asaph doesn't stop with remembering the final destiny of the self-indulgent, arrogant, self-reliant, self-sufficient, and self-satisfied. He also remembers his own, verses 23 and 25. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. What's he saying? He's saying, God is my helper. He goes on, you guide me with your counsel, and afterward you take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you, and earth has nothing I desire beside you. God is my helper. It's remembering the truth of this principle that God is our helper. And there is a great reversal that will come one day as a result of that allows us to put everything in the right perspective in our lives. That allows us to say, as the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews 13:6, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. This is how we understand, along with Paul, that because God is our helper and because this great reversal is coming, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So then we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. The future glory that awaits us is unseen. It is promised. Yes, you can see the fine underwear today, but don't live for that. This is what Jesus is urging us to do, to live for the future glory that awaits us. The problem is we are often blind to that coming reversal, aren't we? And so our flesh idolizes present comfort. It ignores others, settles for empty religion without a true repentance and turning to God as our helper. And we keep trying to save ourselves. In this parable, the unnamed rich man, he represents our flesh. He lived in utter self-reliance, building a kingdom of present comfort while completely ignoring the brokenness laid right at his gate. He possessed the illusion of weight and importance, and even in death, you see, he's still puffed up in pride. Because how does he see Lazarus? Not as a fellow human, not as a brother, but as a servant. A servant he could summon to bring him a dip of cool water. A servant he could send to warn his brothers. This rich man is a direct mirror held up to the Pharisees because you see, they were dressed splendidly. They were the ones, remember, who sought the best seats in the house. They valued wealth as undeniable evidence of their own righteousness. They lived lives that were entirely wrapped up in the world, but they had a veneer of religion to them. Like the rich man, what did they do? They called Abraham their father. They had Abraham's bloodline, that's for sure, but they didn't have a spiritual bloodline. They lacked the faith of Abraham. They too ignored the law and the prophets, the very scriptures that would have commanded them in Isaiah 58 to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter. Instead of obeying God, the Pharisees created a great chasm between themselves and the social and moral outcasts of society. They didn't want to have anything to do with those people. It might make them unclean. They consigned people like Lazarus to starve, both physically and spiritually. They opened up a great chasm between them and the sinners and the poor and the outcasts. In this parable, Jesus turns the tables on them. He takes that social chasm that they created and he fixes it in heaven. It's hard for us to admit, but in subtle ways, we too sometimes buy into this theological misthinking of the Pharisees. You see, sometimes we fall into the trap of kind of believing in what I call Christian karma. The idea that good people, well, they get blessed. And bad people, what goes around comes around. And eternally that's true, but it's not a guarantee for this life. But what happens when we begin to think that way is what? When a health scare hits or we suffer a sudden financial setback, how do we immediately begin to think, what have I done to deserve this? I'm a good person. I don't deserve these things. We naturally assume the law of retribution that in this life, our deeds should get from God what we deserve. But true biblical theology just completely shatters that idea. Think of Job. He was described as the most righteous man on earth, but in the blink of an eye, he became an Old Testament version of Lazarus. He too was covered in sores, remember? Sat in ashes. Or think of Jesus, perfectly righteous. And what did he get for it? He got nailed to the cross. In this life, the righteous sometimes suffer, and evil people sometimes are blessed. Our thinking gets skewed because our eyes are so fixed on the here and now. Because we idolize comfort and security, we assume those things will give us peace and happiness. And we begin to panic when they get threatened. Underneath it all, in our flesh, we have a deep, anxious fear of becoming just like Lazarus. We're terrified of being homeless, terrified of losing our health, terrified of losing our identity we've worked so hard to try to build. Saying this as a man who struggles with the exact same anxious fears that I think many of you do, all our anxieties are driven by the fact that our vision does not extend beyond this present moment. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4:17, our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. But think what happens if we take our eyes off of that eternal weight of glory. What do our troubles achieve for us? Nothing. Because we don't see them correctly if our eyes aren't fixed on that eternal glory. That bosom of Abraham, if you will. And we begin to think, well, all this suffering it's wasted, it's unfair. And we ask, why are the wicked prospering? What did I do wrong? And bitterness begins to creep in. That's what happened to Asaph in Psalm 73. And Asaph said, when that happened, I became senseless and ignorant, a brute beast, before God. And we behave that way sometimes ourselves. Driven by this idol of comfort, our relationships become incredibly transactional, even with the people we love most. We look at people and think, what can you do for me? How will you increase my comfort, my security, make me feel better? Why did the rich man care so very little about Lazarus? It's because Lazarus could do nothing to increase his comfort or his standing and position. All he could do was threaten it. I remember when my kids were small, after working all day, having dinner, struggling through bedtime rituals, it was finally a little bit of me time. I could sit in my recliner, nibble on some popcorn, watch a show. I love my kids, but the last thing I ever wanted was to see their faces again once they had gone off to bed. And the reason why was seeing their faces again would do nothing to increase my comfort and peace. They could only rob me of it. And anger would well up in me quickly over the simple request to come in the room because they were scared of the dark or they needed a drink or there were monsters under the bed. You'd think I'd grow up at some point, right? And get better. But I'm still the same way with my wife. I'll plop down on my recliner, turn on the TV, but not quite loud enough because I can still hear her call out to me from the next room, asking me a question, but I can't hear the question quite well enough. And what follows is an exasperated sigh from me as I have to turn down the TV, get up from my chair, and go find what she wants. My heart isn't set on her in that moment. It's set on me, my comfort, my peace. I'm not really that different from the rich man. I want to walk around my kids. I want to walk around my wife. If they're interfering with my comfort, there's a lot of what about me concern in my life because I think I'm most important. I see myself being dressed in purple. I suspect maybe that happens in your life sometimes. The greater the need of the person in front of us, the more afraid we are to engage with them because it threatens the comfort we hold dear. We avoid the Lazarus on our doorstep because it feels like when we get involved with somebody like that, it's all give and give and give and nothing in return. The world sees as selfishness and it tries to offer solutions, but they all fall drastically short. Some will say, well, we need to tax the rich so the poor can be taken care of, right? But do you hear what they're actually saying when they say that? I want to disrupt somebody else's comfort and security to take care of these poor, unfortunate people, but not my own. And they feel moral because they want to use someone else's resources to fix a problem. And at the root, what is that? That's still self-preservation. Others view helping the poor through philanthropy merely as a means to boost their self-esteem. They see it as a religious duty they can do to maybe escape hell. They see this parable of Lazarus and the rich man as saying, well, I have to be generous, and that's all. Nothing about God as my helper. I have to save myself. I have to fix myself. When they do that, all they're doing is a good work for self-preservation, which makes it selfish. Left to the devices of our own sinful flesh, we will always resort to acts of self-preservation. We'll ignore the problem. We'll try to make the problem someone else's responsibility, or we'll deal with the problem but use it to try to increase our own standing. Blind to the coming reversal, we remain trapped in our own weightless, empty kingdom so often. But because Jesus took the poverty and separation we deserve, we are free to receive this great reversal, to go from being spiritual orphans to eternal heirs of joy. We need someone to wake us from our spiritual blindness, to rescue us from the eternal chasm of our self-centeredness. If we're honest with ourselves, we are, most of us, just like the rich man in the story. And apart from Christ and his miraculous intervention in our lives, we are naturally headed for that same eternal separation. But there's incredibly good news for us in this. Jesus is the true and better rich man who willingly became poor for us. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 8:9, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. In the parable, the rich man begged for Lazarus to be sent back from the dead to warn his brothers. Abraham replied, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced if someone should rise from the dead and go warn them. Jesus actually will rise from the dead. He will do what Lazarus could not do, and the Pharisees still wouldn't believe in him. To accomplish this rescue, Jesus has to undergo an agonizing substitution. He has to experience exactly what the rich man experiences as he goes to Hades, because that's what our sin deserves. Jesus left the purple and fine linen of heavenly glory and the eternal pleasures he had always enjoyed at the Father's right hand to come to earth and take on a Lazarus-like life for us. He was cast outside the gate of Jerusalem, bleeding and treated as unclean, willingly taking the place of a beggar. On the cross, what did Jesus cry? He cried out, I thirst, as he experienced that ultimate cosmic thirst that was brought on by the suffering the white-hot wrath of God in our place. On the cross, Jesus cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? As he endured the agony of the great chasm of separation from the Father, he lived the life of Lazarus, and he endured the hell of the rich man so that we could be welcomed into the eternal bosom of the Father. And when we truly see that Jesus indeed became poor for us, it melts our entitlement. We realize that we're not wealthy benefactors in the story. We're Lazarus, completely bankrupt, utterly dependent on the grace of God. No matter our earthly station in life, we too are nothing more than blind beggars. But by sheer grace, God has shown us the bread of life and brought us to the living water to drink. Understanding this astounding truth entirely rewires our hearts. We're now empowered to look past ourselves and look to glory. We are heirs, eternal heirs with Christ. Instead of spending our lives building a comfortable but weightless existence here on earth, we are able now to freely give away our present comfort to those in need. We get to step into the great reversal right now, right here in this moment, and begin to live in the truth of that great reversal that we know is coming because of what Christ has done for us. We're now entirely free from the fear of losing anything because we know that in Christ we already have an eternal weight of glory that is kept in heaven for us and no one can disturb it. Because Christ endured our devastating reversal, we're empowered now to look past ourselves and freely give away our present comfort to those in need. What does it matter? We're not going to take it with us anyway. The old way of the flesh is to either walk right past the gate, ignoring the needs of others to protect our wealth, our time, our comfort, or to get involved only on a transactional basis, loving and helping as long as we think there's something in it for us. Some blessing. But that's just selfish. The new way, the Spirit opens our eyes to see people not as transactions, not as interruptions, not as nuisances, but eternal souls that really matter. We now get to view them as people who need to find the bread of life, the very same bread the Spirit graciously has led us to when we were just blind beggars without help and without hope. Look at the sober warning Jesus ends this parable with. He said to him, if they did not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced if someone rises from the dead. Think what the law and the prophets do. They teach us how we're designed to live. But the law and the prophets by themselves cannot take our hearts of stone and give us a heart of flesh. If they had the power to do that, the rich man and his brothers would have been changed by them. The Pharisees would have been changed by them. No, the only one who can take your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh is God. Paul says in Romans 8:3, for what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the flesh, God did by sending his own Son. It was grace, and the grace of God alone that changes a heart from a worshiper of self to a worshiper of God. It's the grace of Christ alone that loosens the chains of injustice and unties the cords of the yoke. It's the grace of God alone that empowers a heart to freely share the bread of life with the hungry, to provide shelter for the wanderer, and to clothe the naked, rather than turning away and pretending we don't see them. What does this grace abounding in our everyday lives mean for us today? It means that we're free to be radically generous, to give it away, because we're gaining a treasure we cannot lose. We get to welcome the marginalized and the lost, the least of these, those who can offer nothing in return, simply because that's exactly what Jesus did for us. It's how he loved us when we had nothing to offer him. The world is full of advice on generosity, but it always centers back and circles back to self. Where the world gives out of self-preservation, trying to save themselves, or to gain a tax refund, or to receive recognition, or even just manufacture a good feeling about oneself. A Christian gives from an entirely different well, an inexhaustible well of grace that they've received freely. We give because by grace our eyes have been opened to the breathtaking beauty of Christ and the eternal weight of glory that is now securely ours in him. Seeing the truth of this momentary life versus the solid reality of eternity, that's what sets us free to live generously and radically differently. It allows us to live out the profound truth we are freely able to gladly give up what we cannot keep anyway, to gain that which we can never lose. As we think about this parable, we can easily imagine this rich man as being a hefty man in every sense of the word. To be glorious means to be weighty, and that's what the word glory means in Hebrew. This rich man's weighty in this life. Purple clothes indicate he's a man of great standing. He's surely rotund from all his feasting. In every way, in this life, he's a man of heft until he dies, that is. And then he becomes like the characters in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, a forgotten nobody, a weightless ghost, without even a name. On the other hand, we can easily imagine Lazarus going through life skin and bones, almost like a ghost in his earthly life. He goes unnoticed by the rich man, but in his death he becomes a glorious creature, a man of eternal weight and standing who feasts in the house of Zion at the bosom of Abraham. In telling this parable, Jesus wants us to see that eternal weightiness of each man is determined by the choices we make today. It's not determined by if we're rich or poor, but by the choices we make in whatever it is God's entrusted to us. It's a choice of either helping yourself and living in the moment or having God as your helper as you look to eternity. As Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians 4:18, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. To fix our eyes on what is eternal, what do we have to do? We have to look to the true and better Lazarus who willingly took our place at the cross and suffered the anguish we deserved. Hebrews 13:12-14 perfectly captures this final declaration of grace I want to leave with you. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. At the beginning of our time, I asked, what happens when you put your weight on the wrong thing? Today, Jesus is inviting you to put all your weight, all the weight of eternity, entirely on him. Stop clinging to temporary comforts that will only leave you weightless and empty in the end. Rest in the one who endured your separation so you could have the heaven he earned through his righteous life. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to build it. You simply get to receive it because he came to freely give it to you at the cross. Come to him outside the gate and step into the great reversal he promises you today. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this promise and the warning. It's a promise and warning all in one that things as they are today won't always be this way. There is a great reversal coming where those who see themselves as rich in this life become very poor in the next life because they were reliant on self and on material things. And those who see themselves as poor in this life, helpless and without hope, have an eternal hope and eternal glory because they see Christ, and the hope of Christ is their helper. Help us to see that great reversal, each one of us, as we leave here today, and live in its truth. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.